During the Second World War, over 100,000 young volunteers faced one of the most dangerous tasks of any British serviceman and suffered the highest casualty rates. Nearly half of them were killed. They were known as Bomber Command, a force who took on Hitler when air power was the only way at striking back at Nazi Germany. And this cathedral in the heart of Lincoln was an important landmark for the men of Bomber Command, guiding them safely home. Lincolnshire's flat landscape and proximity to Germany made it the perfect place for Bomber Command to be stationed, earning it the nickname Bomber County. Thousands of planes flew from here, full of brave young men on dangerous missions deep into enemy territory. But despite their heroism, the men of Bomber Command found themselves ignored after the war. Their orders meant they led massive bombing attacks on Hamburg and Dresden in the later months of the war, killing thousands of civilians. It was after the Germans bombed the city of Coventry with such devastating consequences in 1940 that Commander-in-Chief of Bomber Command, Sir Arthur Harris, began a new and more controversial strategy known as area bombing. The aim was not just to destroy specific targets, but the people and places surrounding those targets. Now, many people thought these attacks unnecessary, as the war was virtually won by then. Whilst other servicemen received their medals, the controversy surrounding Bomber Command left these servicemen empty-handed. For those young men who risked their lives night after night, it must have felt very difficult to swallow. But time has helped the nation realise the importance of Bomber Command's contribution, and one family especially is working hard to keep this memory alive. Harold and Fred Panton lost their brother Christopher during a bombing raid over Nuremberg on the 31st of March 1944. They were all just teenagers at the time. To remember Christopher and the thousands of men who were killed fighting in Bomber Command, Fred and his family have set up their own museum and have given their lives for the last 25 years to transforming this old RAF base into what is now an incredible collection of stories and artefacts. The original control tower still stands, and it's a stark reminder of the thousands of planes that flew out of this Lincolnshire airfield. The museum chapel has been set up to honour those men who didn't return. Of the 212 operations carried out from this airfield during the Second World War, 121 failed to come back. The family are very proud of their unique collection of World War II history, from the original buildings to the period vehicles. And their most precious antique is pretty special. It's only one of 3 working Lancasters left in the world. What an aircraft! From 1942, this mighty 4-engined machine became the mainstay of the RAF during the Second World War. It carried the biggest bomb load of any other aircraft, and it became the most famous and most successful of all the night bombers. Fred and his family managed to get hold of one of the only Lancasters that didn't take part in active service. Just Jane is the centrepiece of this museum and has been the family's labour of love for nearly 20 years. She's a fine tribute to brother Chris, who was an engineer in Bomber Command. Fred, that's the biggest antique I've seen in my life.
Oh, is it?
And the biggest restoration project.
Yeah, very good, yeah.
You and Harold have done the most remarkable job.
Yeah.
I know about your brother Christopher. Was really that the turning point for you to say, right, one day I'm going to do something in his memory?
It would be, yeah, and for Bomber Command.
Can you talk to me about Christopher?
Yes, I can.
Tell me what happened.
He was on his last operation, really.
Gosh.
Yeah. And that night they went to Nuremberg. There should have been more cloud than what there was. 40 miles from the target, they could see the streets in Nuremberg, like shining like about the width of your finger, like pieces of ribbon, all the streets, and the German night fighter come underneath and got the starboard inner engine on fire. They lost power on one side, and Nielsen couldn't hold it because they still got the bombs on, you see, and they didn't have a chance to get out. About, 4 or 5 years ago, a German who lives not far from the crash site wrote to us to see if we minded him going to go with his metal detector to see what he could find. Yeah.
And did he find anything?
He did. Well, he found this little adjustable spanner.
That was Christopher's, was it?
Yeah, it was. And when he went on up, so he took that.
Just in case he had to adjust something?
Yeah, he just carried it in his pocket.
Did he write to you before that flight, or write to Mum and Dad? Or?
He did, yeah, he did. The very last letter he wrote to my sister Gwen. And Chris, when he wrote, he never put any kisses or anything like that, any letter, you know. This particular, very last letter, he put some kisses on it, big ones. Pretty sure he knew he wasn't going to make it, you know. Mm.
This, all your land here, this was an older airfield, wasn't it?
It was, yes,
so
it was.
Were Lancasters taking off
Oh
from
yeah,
here?
they were. I always waved to them. And I didn't realise, and I didn't know until probably 2 years ago, that a veteran said to me, did I know what the worst thing that veterans didn't like to see? I said, no. I said, I've no idea. He said, we didn't like when people used to wave to us. To them, it was like waving goodbye.
Yeah, do you know, I can imagine that.
Yeah.
One day, Fred,
yeah.
you and Harold are going to get this.
Oh yeah. Before anything happens to me, I want to see that flying.
Don't blame
Yeah.
you. Don't blame you. It'll happen.
Yeah,
It'll
come.
You're a determined man.
One step at a time.
Although Just Jane taxis down the runway, she doesn't fly yet. But Fred's restoration project is nearing its completion. New engines have been ordered and the family hope it will be airworthy within a year. Here we are, right up in the cockpit. You know, the first thing that struck me was the lack of space inside. Secondly, now, once I've crawled the length of this aircraft, there is not a lot of protection. I mean, you know, it's not bulletproof. The fuselage is very, very thin. There's glass everywhere. The pilot had no GPS, no satellite navigation system, no air traffic control, you know, telling him what to do. He relied on his navigator, and this chap had a compass, a map, a ruler, and a watch, basically. It was crucial, plotting out where precisely these bombs had to be dropped. These men, you have to remember, they were volunteers. They put their lives through hell to protect our country. I wouldn't like to have done it. I really wouldn't have. I don't think I'd be brave enough. And that bravery has finally been given the recognition it deserves. In June 2012, a memorial dedicated to the men of Bomber Command and to the civilians who lost their lives in the controversial bombings was finally unveiled in London.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Well, it's sad that it's taken so long for the men of Bomber Command to be officially recognised, but it's thanks to Fred and his family that their story has been told right here in Lincolnshire. It's a fitting tribute to Bomber Command and to Bomber County. And I, for one, can't wait to come back in a couple of years, where hopefully I will take a flight with Fred.